As I promised, we have an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary discussion and also transgenerational. And in that context, I am very happy to invite Caroline-JESSEN, who works at the Dubnov Institute since October 2021. She studied German literature and art history in Bonn University and St. Andrews and received her PhD in 2015. Between 2012 and 2021, she worked at the research department and the library of the German Literature Archive, Marbach. Her current project focuses on translocations of archival and archives and collections, especially Zalman Schocken autograph collection. Caroline, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alona, for this very kind introduction. Yeah. In 1937, the Jewish entrepreneur, and investor, and publisher Zalman Schocken organized a reception in the hall of Schocken Library to celebrate the 50th birthday of Erich Mendelsohn. In his opening address, he looked back at his relationship with the architect. By then, Mendelsohn had designed and overseen the construction of 3 huge department stores in Nuremberg, Stuttgart, and Chemnitz, as well as the construction of a library building, which some of you saw yesterday, and a spacious private house and garden for Schocken in Jerusalem. When his employer organized the reception, he and others, such as their joint friend Kurt Blumenfeld, hoped to convince Mendelsohn of the necessity to settle in Palestine and to establish himself as an architect for the Jewish community. With a pathos Kurt Blumenfeld shared with Mendelsohn, he went to such lengths as to write that he hoped Mendelsohn would become a leading builder of the country, an Erbauer des Landes. 2 years later, it became obvious that these hopes would not become true. By 1941, Mendelsohn settled in America, as did Zalman Schocken some 2 years later, despite his new large house, garden, and library in Jerusalem. Blumenfeld, as well as others who attended the evening, stayed. In my presentation, I would like to have a closer look at the paths of Mendelsohn, Schocken, Blumenfeld before their immigration from Germany after the National Socialist rise to power, to grasp the melancholy of this birthday party in 1937, and maybe more importantly, to look at the relationship of art, architecture, and Jewish cultural politics in the years after World War I. This was something Alona asked me to do, and to have kind of a special look into the idea of Orientalism, so I try. I will start with an excerpt from Schocken's memory of his encounter with Erich Mendelsohn's work. I first became acquainted, I quote, with Erich Mendelsohn. This may be a coincidence under the sign of Palestine. I don't have a good memory of the year, but I think it was in 1918 or 1919 when I was told that I had to see an exhibition by a Palestinian sculptor at Paul Cassirer. I walked through the rooms of Cassirer, saw beautiful figures there, and only glanced sideways at the walls and found drawings, name of the artist unknown, that captivated me. I no longer saw the round sculptures by A, like he doesn't say the name, he just says A, but the fantasies of a young architect, Erich Mendelsohn. The name was only known to me as the name of the large Mendelsohn family. Years passed before Erich Mendelsohn came into our circle. In a certain sense, it characterizes his past professional work in Germany that I had the opportunity to build together with Erich Mendelsohn in Germany for 8 years, and in 1933, when I returned to broken Germany after a long time of absence, I would not have believed that I would meet him here in Jerusalem in a house built by Mendelsohn. This evening, which I'm spending in a social circle in this house for the first time, is a special celebration for me. That's Schocken in 1937. This memory is interesting for several reasons. As has been noted by others, the quote indicates that Schocken encountered Mendelsohn's work shortly after the end of World War I at the impactful exhibition Architectures in Steel and Reinforced Concrete. Schocken even stresses this close connection to the war by mentioning his uncertainty if the exhibition opened in 1918 or 1919. By 1919, Germany had become a republic in a very fragile political climate. It was in these years that Schocken started to expand his chain of stores significantly and to develop a keen interest in the corporate design of the Schocken stores. At the same time, the war, accompanied by the arrival of thousands of Jews from Eastern Europe and Russia, for whose rights Schocken fought, deepened his sense of a need for Jewish cultural programs, investment in Palestine, and a new understanding of the limits of Jewish integration into German society. For Schocken, the encounter with Mendelsohn's drawings was vielleicht ein Zufall, maybe a matter of chance, but as an anecdote, the gallery visit stresses, I think, Schocken's direct response to the architect's work. His speech can be read as a truthful account of the beginning of a professional relationship. At the same time, it is a statement marking Schocken's discovery of a pioneering artist and the businessman's discerning eye. Schocken's speech does not mention the fact that he and Mendelsohn only met 5 years later when their joint friend Kurt Blumenfeld suggested a meeting and introduced the architect to Schocken. And here you see a photo of Blumenfeld, which is slightly later. In the context of the speech in a setting of European immigrant friends in Jerusalem, the simple reference to Paul Kassierer serves as a code word. The attendant crowd at the event would have known that in the last years of the Wilhelminian Empire and the years of the Weimar Republic, the Jewish gallerist and publisher Paul Kassierer belonged to the cultural elite of Berlin. Kassierer had introduced the French Impressionists and Van Gogh to Germany. He had been a major supporter of Max Liebermann. For Schocken and others who had started collecting graphic works as well as drawings after World War I, Kassierer was a major institution in Berlin. Kassierer's gallery encompassed 2 entire floors and regularly showed works of contemporary artists, some of whom Schocken collected, such as Käthe Kollwitz. Most accounts of the Kassierer exhibition in 1919 mention the fact that Mendelssohn's drawings were shown alongside works of other artists. So there are advertisements that list Paul Holz and Hermine Moos, as you can see here, for example. And the historian Thilo Richter mentions August Gaul, Anton Kerschbaumer, Max Slevogt. This seems to contradict Schocken's memory, who stresses the fact that he saw Mendelssohn's sketches of imaginary buildings, industrial buildings, among others, fantasies, alongside the works of a Palestinian Jewish artist, Die runden Plastiken von A, the round sculptures of A. By 1919, this young Palestinian artist in Berlin seems to have been Yusuf Abu, an artist born in Sfat in 1888, who had studied drawing, painting, and sculpture at the Berlin University of Arts from 9/11 onwards. And here you see a slightly later photograph of Abu. By 1919, Abu had a master studio at the Academy of Arts in Berlin. He even became a member of the Association of German Artists. In the 1920s, Abu belonged to the circle of friends of Else Lasker-Schüler, whom he portrayed several times and who in turn wrote a poem about him. Abu was was slightly younger than Mendelssohn, and while Schocken regarded his bust as beautiful, schön, and round, rund, they do not really seem to have caught his attention, while Mendelssohn's minimalist, futuristic, I think, works enthralled him. This juxtaposition creates a specific narrative. While Schocken, one of the leading German Zionists at that time, went to Kassierer to see the works of a Jewish artist from Palestine, Erich Israel, he was captured by the industrial, decidedly modern fantasy buildings of a young man whose name reminded him of the famous Mendelsohn family. Schocken's account creates an elusive Jewish context for this encounter with works that had per se no explicit Jewish meaning at all for him, but were created in the battlefield and tuned to a time of huge changes in the economic industrial field consumer culture. Schocken's rhetoric move must be seen in its very specific social context. At the end of the 19th century, questions of belonging and identity had become more and more urgent for Jews in Germany, as Paul Mendelsohn has magnificently explained. Religion had lost its meaning, defining role for a Jewish sense of belonging for many people. while nationalism gained more and more momentum throughout Europe. Neither Erich Mendelsohn nor Salman Schocken or their mutual friend Kurt Blumenfeld were particularly religious in a conservative sense. As did others, they strived to define Jewishness in new ways, attuned to its surrounding cultural environment. Martin Buber's role for this generation of German Jews can hardly be overestimated. Early on, his essays on a renaissance of Jewish culture had had a huge impact on a renewed interest in Jewish tradition and the search for a new, modern expression of Jewish identity, and we've heard about this. Kurt Blumenfeld went so far as to write that not a certain Jewish content was decisive, but the way in which a certain theme or topic was treated, Jewishness thus became a matter of form for him. In ihr spricht sich das jüdisch-funktionelle aus, Blumenfeld writes, das stärker ist als alle Inhalte. It expresses the Jewish functional which is stronger than all content. Such a view allowed many creative expressions to be regarded as Jewish or as not Jewish. Long before 1933, Zionist discourse had treated the German bourgeois Bildungsknowledge and its aesthetic as a fetish of Jewish assimilation ideology, a symptom of what was regarded an inauthentic Jewish life. The alleged pillars of the Wilhelminian Empire, these are all quotes, were deemed an amalgamation of false convention, a tyranny of empty formalities and memory caboodle, even by members of moderate Jewish movements. For many young Zionists, assimilation represented a surrender to the norms of a German middle class, in which the ideals of the Enlightenment had become superficial, false, or insincere. I'm mentioning this to illustrate that there were many creative, individual, or loosely organized expressions of Jewish belonging, many of which were connected to progressive norms, German avant-garde culture, and yet they formed part of general trends in German society at that time. One of the most exciting expressions is perhaps the oeuvre of Else Lasker-Schüler, who some years later would become a friend of Louise and Erich Mendelsohn. Her work and even her persona were part of the avant-garde, and yet she deliberately took up strains of Jewish tradition represented by the Bible, Hebrew language, and the most exposed Jewish German writer Heinrich Heine. Lasker-Schüler was one of the most important writers published by Paul Cassirer, who produced lavish illustrated editions of her poetry. Cassirer, by the way, also published works of Hermann Struck, who also immigrated to Palestine later. For Lasker-Schüler, there was no separation between life and work, real life and poetic space. During the years immediately before World War I, she and the Jewish German poet Karl Wolfskehl had, for example, entertained an intense correspondence on the basis of their shared interest in Jewishness as an expression of Oriental creativity. The letter shown here is one of the last testimonies of this exchange. It might serve to illustrate a world rich in imagery in which Lasker-Schüler addressed Wolfskehl as King Ramsenid, King of Gibeon, and introduced herself as Prince of Thebes. In these letters, their Judaism was Egyptian, Arab, Oriental, in any case special. This was hardly cultural Zionism. The letter is fantasy Arabic written in the Latin alphabet. Imagery like the illustrated flowers and moons and stars in the text were reminiscent of the German Romantics, yet they also make tangible a Jewish experience of difference that persisted despite the legal emancipation of Jews in Germany. The images conceived here affirm a creative mix of Jewish tradition, literature, and contemporary Orientalism. Both poets were noble Egyptians, as Lasker-Schüler explains in her Malik, a work in which the imagery of the letters is integrated into a larger story involving Franz Marc, who died in World War I. I'm mentioning this example to stress that all these categories were distinct than we might think in retrospective. They were elusive contexts. The playful interweaving of Jewish and Oriental imagery can be seen against the background of a wider cultural and aesthetic interest in the East. Publishers published Chinese and Arab fairy tales, Buddhist teachings, and Hasidic tales side by side. And yet, as Michael Brenner stresses in his classic account of the Renaissance of Jewish culture in Weimar Germany, one should not mistake this Jewish Renaissance as a German-Jewish symbiosis. The development has to be seen, he writes, as an indicator of the situation of crisis which growing anti-Semitism meant for Jews in the Weimar Republic. Lasker Schüler's aesthetic expression of Jewishness as Oriental beauty reclaimed a category that was very often used against Jewish writers, artists, businessmen and women, architects. Here I would like to return to Erich Mendelsohn. In a letter to Salman Schocken, with which Kurt Blumenfeld introduced Mendelsohn to him, Blumenfeld briefly mentions the difficulties the architect experienced with the authorities in Berlin when constructing the Herbrichhaus in Berlin's Leipziger Straße. Blumenfeld then states that he believes, quote, our own institutions should at least offer Mendelsohn, whose way is fought and opposed as being too Oriental, the opportunity to take part in Palestinian competitions. He added that Mendelsohn was ein richtiger Zionist, a true Zionist. For Blumenfeld, as he stressed in 1947, Zionism had been a secular matter, quote, offshoot of an attempt of German Jews to come to terms with the world. There had been no other way of Jewish self-assertion, quote, end. As Blumenfeld's letter to Schocken indicates, Oriental might have had a truly positive meaning for those who had read essays such as Martin Buber's Der Geist des Orients und das Judentum from 1916, or those within the small cultural avant-garde scene of Berlin and other cities. And the Jewish gallerist and publisher Kassierer represented this segment of society. But at the same time, generally and fundamentally, remained an anti-Semitic stereotype, a characteristic that was often used to delineate a border between Jewish and German. It was a shifting code word, as a letter by Erich Mendelsohn to Louise from 1924 indicates very well. I quote, the Altstein government building officer is a Völkisch architect. He wants the autochthonous high roof, and with this he implies that the flat roof is Oriental. I helped him to be explicit in this matter and took him to the mayor to admit it. Blumenfeld, as well as Mendelsohn in this case, were aware that the label Oriental was used as a strategy to marginalize and dismiss the works of this young and promising architect as undeutsch, not German enough. It is against this background that Schocken's speech from 1937 needs to be understood as an anecdote stressing that the Oriental essence was simply not a category to which he had attributed any value when he encountered Mendelssohn's drawings. Even though Schocken's interest in Judaism had been fueled by Martin Buber's Tales of Rabbi Nachman, he rarely adopted the latter's rhetoric and refrained from these slightly essentialist ideas of Jewishness of Buber's early work. Although he had initially visited Kassierer's gallery to see works of an Oriental Palestinian Jewish artist, it was the newness of Mendelssohn's industrial minimalist fantasies which had captured him, Mendelssohn's pronounced alliance of architecture with the avant-garde. I'm aware that architects and historians of architecture at this conference might have much more to say to this than I can do, so I content myself with an example from the field of drawing to show which is in my eyes a striking aesthetic parallel of vision in the minimalist treatment of a page, the reduction of drawing to its very essence. These drawings, this is by Lasker Schüler, this is by Mendelsohn. These drawings were provocative, and I do believe that Schocken was attracted, among other things, to this visual provocation as it seemed to say goodbye to ornament and decorative pomp. The mix of functional design and utopian ideas was unorthodox, but the little drawings were able to communicate the core of an aesthetic principle. They corresponded, to borrow Gershom Schocken's words, with the Schocken Company's aim to set an end to the pseudo-classicist, newly Gothic department store facades and to find new forms that truly express their time, die Wahrheit der Epoche ausdrücken, he writes, by integrating economic considerations and by stressing their status as Funktionsbauten functional architecture. Schocken himself alludes to this in his speech on Mendelssohn. The profession of the architect is in and of itself an impossibility. It has to generate a struggle with the personality of the architect and certainly with his environment, because here a freelance artist who dreams into the dimensions has to realize something with stone and iron which serves everyday purposes, mathematically correct. If this architect is confronted with a person who, I would like to say, sees a divine service in taking business seriously, and with this he thinks of himself, you will understand how difficult it is to create the bridge between the architect who creates dreamlike space and the department store calculator. According to Schocken, it was this confrontation and collaboration that had brought buildings such as the Stuttgart Mendelsohn store into the Brockhaus, a major German reference work, and turned such buildings into prototypes in a way. For Schocken, the integration of function, economic discipline, and beauty seems to have been a guiding theme in various fields of his activities and writings. As one of the financially strong entrepreneurs in Germany, Schocken worked with Jewish as well as non-Jewish politicians, businessmen, bankers, and cultural institutions in Saxony and beyond. As a supporter of the Werkbund, but also as a Jewish entrepreneur who faced throughout the 1920s anti-Semitic criticism as a Warenhausjude, a department store Jew, exploiting his German customers, Schocken was convinced of the necessity to demonstrate a very specific form, let's say elegant modesty, and to integrate thinking and functional thinking as a principle communicating his store's philosophy, good quality, at affordable prices, no luxury. He often stressed the contribution of stores to the general improvement of the German economy, the Kaufkraft of the mark. Mendelsohn, in turn, was apt to integrate these different parameters to a maximum degree, as Schocken thinks or writes. The function of a store, the rapidly changing economic situation in Germany in these years, the financial means at hand, the logistics, the materials available, the employment of local contractors whose names would sometimes be listed in ads announcing the opening of new stores, and so on. These financial, logistic, larger economic aspects were important and essential to the new aesthetic language for the department stores of Schocken. Schocken walked a thin tightrope, I think, by supporting Jewish and non-Jewish organizations investing in representative, large new buildings while abstaining from luxury. His interest in the Bauhaus also, whose members he employed in various tasks related to his stores, might need to be seen as a product of a complex amalgam of economic thinking and a new aesthetic or taste, as well as a cautious strategy to deal with anti-Jewish stereotypes. In this one regard, both the aesthetic language of Schocken's department stores and the Orientalist and essentialist rhetoric, which per se have nothing in common, need to be regarded as counter-strategies, as phenomena informed or determined by their social, political, cultural environment as much as they are free choices, creative choices. Even Louise Mendelsohn sometimes used essentialist topoi in her letters to Erich Mendelsohn during World War I, when she stressed a specifically Jewish or Oriental Asian idea of unity as a characteristic of their thinking. And it might be very difficult, in fact would be a study maybe in its own right, to analyze these dynamics in detail, be this ideas of the Orient or the idea of functional beauty, and to distinguish the rhetoric of the architect and his employer from the praxis documented in the archives, the visual language at hand, the integration of, say, Mediterranean construction principles, and to understand their meaning in their historical context. As Gershom Schocken highlighted, my father's department stores were not built in an ideal country, but under the shadow of impending catastrophe in the troubled Germany of the years following World War I. Thank you.